July 1st, 1863. The sleepy Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg, a place of just 2,400 souls, is about to become the unwilling host to the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on North American soil. For 3 scorching summer days, this quiet crossroads would become the epicenter of a nation's agony, a brutal crucible that would test the very soul of the United States. This is the story of Gettysburg, the battle that became the high water mark of the Confederacy and a pivotal turning point in the American Civil War. It all began almost by accident. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by the legendary General Robert E. Lee, was on the move. Fresh off a stunning victory at Chancellorsville, Lee decided to take the war to the North for a second time. His goals were ambitious. Disrupt the Union's ability to wage war, gather much-needed supplies, and perhaps even force a negotiated peace by threatening major northern cities like Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. He was confident, his army seemingly invincible. Meanwhile, the Union's Army of the Potomac, now under the brand-new command of General George Meade, who had only been in charge for 3 days, was scrambling to find Lee's army. No one planned for the fight to happen at Gettysburg. The town was simply a hub, a place where 10 roads converged. And on that fateful July morning, a Confederate division heading towards Gettysburg to seize a rumored supply of shoes collided with 2 brigades of Union cavalry commanded by the tenacious General John Buford. The battle had begun. Buford knew he was outnumbered, but he also recognized the strategic importance of the high ground south of town, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and the long ridges running south. He skillfully deployed his men, dismounting them to fight as infantry, determined to hold off the Confederate advance long enough for the main Union army to arrive and secure those vital positions. For hours, his troopers fought a desperate delaying action against overwhelming odds. By the afternoon, Union infantry from the 1st and 11th Corps had arrived, but so had more Confederates. The fighting west and north of Gettysburg was ferocious, a chaotic swirl of smoke, lead, and steel. Despite their valor, the Union lines eventually buckled and broke. The survivors retreated in disarray through the streets of the town, rallying on the high ground Buford had so wisely identified, Cemetery Hill. Day 1 was a Confederate victory, but a costly one. And crucially, the Union held the high ground. As night fell on July 1st, the rest of both armies converged on Gettysburg like moths to a flame. The Union Army formed a formidable defensive line shaped like a giant fishhook, stretching from Culp's Hill on the right, curving around Cemetery Hill and running south for nearly 2 miles along Cemetery Ridge to 2 rocky hills known as Little Round Top and Big Round Top. Lee, encouraged by the first day's success, was determined to press his attack. His trusted second-in-command, General James Longstreet, argued for a different strategy, a flanking maneuver to get between the Union Army and Washington, D.C., forcing Meade to attack them on ground of their own choosing. But Lee was resolute. He would attack the Union flanks. Day 2, July 2nd, saw some of the most savage and iconic fighting of the entire war. The Confederate plan was to launch a massive, coordinated assault on both ends of the Union line simultaneously. However, things went wrong from the start. The attacks were delayed and uncoordinated. The main Confederate effort fell on the Union left flank. A Union general, Daniel Sickles, had disobeyed orders and moved his entire corps forward from Cemetery Ridge to a more exposed position, creating a salient that included a wheat field, a peach orchard, and a tangled mess of boulders called Devil's Den. This unauthorized move nearly cost the Union the battle. Longstreet's Confederates smashed into Sickles's exposed corps with brutal force. The fighting in the wheat field and the peach orchard was a horrific meat grinder, with the fields changing hands multiple times. At Devil's Den, sharpshooters picked off soldiers from amidst the giant rocks. The most critical fight of the day, however, erupted on Little Round Top. This small, rocky hill was the extreme left of the Union line, and at the start of the attack, it was virtually undefended. Realizing the impending disaster, a Union engineering officer, Gouverneur K. Warren, frantically redirected troops to the summit just as the Confederates began their ascent. Among them was the 20th Maine, commanded by a college professor named Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Out of ammunition after repelling multiple charges, Chamberlain made a decision of stunning audacity. He ordered his men to fix bayonets and charge down the hill, a desperate wheeling maneuver that swept the exhausted Confederates before them and saved the Union flank. By the end of the day, after hours of unimaginable carnage, the Union line had bent, but it had not broken. The fishhook held. After failing to break the Union flanks on day 2, Lee made his most fateful decision. On July 3rd, he would stake everything on a single massive frontal assault against the center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. General Longstreet was vehemently opposed, believing it to be a suicidal gamble, but Lee was unswayed. The plan began with the largest artillery bombardment of the war. For nearly 2 hours, over 150 Confederate cannons pounded the Union position, trying to soften up the defenses. The Union artillery, under General Henry Hunt, wisely conserved its ammunition, tricking the Confederates into thinking they had succeeded. Then, at around 3 p.m., the guns fell silent. Out of the woods on Seminary Ridge emerged a line of soldiers nearly a mile wide. Roughly 12,500 Confederate infantry, led by divisions under Generals George Pickett, Johnston Pettigrew, and Isaac Trimble, began their steady march across a mile of open, rolling fields toward a small clump of trees on Cemetery Ridge. This was Pickett's charge. It was a magnificent and terrible sight. Union cannons, which had been waiting, opened up, tearing horrific gaps in the Confederate lines. As they got closer, Union rifle fire joined the maelstrom. Men fell by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Yet they kept coming. A small fraction, perhaps a few hundred men, managed to breach the low stone wall on Cemetery Ridge in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle. This point, known as the Angle, would become the high-water mark of the Confederacy. But it was not enough. They were too few, unsupported, and overwhelmed. The Union line held, and the survivors of the charge were killed, captured, or forced to stream back across the deadly field. The gamble had failed. As the shattered remnants of his command returned, Lee rode among them, telling them, "It is all my fault." The battle was over. On July 4th, Independence Day, the two battered armies stared at each other from across the blood-soaked fields, too exhausted to fight. That night, under the cover of a torrential downpour, Lee began his sorrowful retreat back to Virginia. The Battle of Gettysburg resulted in a staggering 51,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, from both sides combined, the costliest battle in U.S. history. The Union victory at Gettysburg, coupled with the fall of Vicksburg on the same day, marked a definitive turning point. The Confederacy would never again mount a major offensive into the North. The tide of war had irrevocably turned. 4 months later, President Abraham Lincoln would visit the battlefield to dedicate a national cemetery. In a short, 2-minute address, he gave new meaning to the sacrifice, speaking of a new birth of freedom and resolving that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The battle had ended, but its legacy, forged in courage and sacrifice, would echo through eternity. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as we did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you next time.